The movie begins with a man named Clay, who used to be part of a secret special forces group called the Beekeepers. This group worked for the United States government, handling cases that were too secret for regular police. After leaving the Beekeepers, Clay decides to live a quiet life and becomes a beekeeper. He rents a garage from an older woman named Mrs. Parker. Mrs. Parker is a retired teacher who now works with a charity that helps poor women and children. She likes having Clay as a tenant because he is always polite and kind. Clay is thankful to Mrs. Parker for letting him rent the garage. One day, after finishing his work, Mrs. Parker invites Clay to have dinner with her. While she is working on her laptop, a virus warning pops up, saying her hard drive is infected. The warning tells her to call a phone number to stop the virus from deleting her data. Mrs. Parker quickly calls the number. Sadly, the number leads to a gang of criminals pretending to be an antivirus company. As soon as she calls, the hackers take control of her computer and see some of her financial transactions. Mrs. Parker, who doesn't know much about computers, asks for help from the manager, Garnett. She is confused by what is happening on her screen. Garnett tells her it is part of their virus removal process and apologizes for the trouble. He then asks for her bank account information, promising compensation from their company. Without hesitation, Mrs. Parker gives her bank details to Garnett and is shocked to receive $50,000 as compensation. Later, Garnett tells her that he was only supposed to send $500 and asks her to return the extra money. Without thinking, Mrs. Parker goes online to return the money. As she types her password to complete the transaction, all her money disappears. Garnett and his team have hacked her bank account, leaving Mrs. Parker in shock. She has lost all her savings and the funds for the charity she manages. While Mrs. Parker is overwhelmed by the sudden theft, Clay is busy harvesting honey and putting it into a glass jar. He plans to give the honey as a gift to Mrs. Parker. However, when he arrives at her house, he feels something is wrong and carefully grabs a knife from the kitchen for protection. When Clay enters the living room, he is shocked to find Mrs. Parker dead with a pistol on the floor next to her. Just then, an FBI agent named Verona arrives, pointing her weapon at Clay. Verona thinks Clay is involved in Mrs. Parker's death, who, to make things more complicated, is her mother. Verona calls the local police, who quickly come, investigate Mrs. Parker's house, and take Clay to the police station for questioning. Despite her deep sadness over her mother's death, Verona is determined to find out the truth. She joins the investigation herself. During the crime scene examination, Verona finds evidence that her mother had been tricked by a criminal gang known for phishing scams. They had stolen all her mother's savings and the charity's funds she managed. To Verona's surprise, she discovers that her mother's death was not a murder. With proof that Mrs. Parker had taken her own life, the police release Clay. The next day, as Clay returns home, Verona comes to apologize for wrongly accusing him of Mrs. Parker's death. She tells him about her mother's death and reveals the criminal gang pretending to be an antivirus company that tricked her mother and stole her money. Verona explains that this criminal group has been escaping the FBI for years. Hearing this, Clay contacts the Beekeepers and asks them to find the criminal gang. He wants to get justice for Mrs. Parker. The Beekeepers quickly gather information about UDG, the fake antivirus company run by Garnett, and give it to Clay. Soon after, Clay goes to the UDG headquarters with 2 jerry cans of gasoline. He disables the security guards and confronts the employees in the control room. Clay attacks one of them and demands they promise never to scam people like Mrs. Parker again. He then makes them leave the room and pours gasoline on all the computer equipment. When Garnett and his men arrive to confront Clay, he easily overpowers them. Clay sets up a bomb to explode when he gets a phone call and warns Garnett to run if he wants to live. Moments later, a call comes in, causing a huge explosion that destroys much of the building. After the explosion at the UDG building, Garnett contacts his boss, Danforth, to tell him what happened. He explains that a man calling himself the Beekeeper had attacked their company, disabled their security, and blown up their headquarters. In response, Danforth orders Garnett to hire some thugs and tells them to kill Clay. Meanwhile, Verona, who hears about the explosion at the UDG headquarters, feels a sense of satisfaction. The next day, Garnett and his hired thugs found out where Clay was while he was working at his bee farm. As Clay left the farm, Garnett and his men destroyed the beehives and secretly followed him. Clay seemed to know they were following him and was ready for a fight. When he got to his home, Garnett and his gang attacked him. Clay defended himself well, fighting back and killing the thugs. Garnett managed to escape. At the same time, Verona was questioning a UDG employee when she heard about a fire at her mother's house. She rushed there and saw that Clay's garage was burned down. She found an ID card from UDG on one of the bodies from the fire, making her think Clay was involved in all the UDG incidents. Meanwhile, Garnett, after escaping from Clay, called Danforth to tell him the assassination plan failed and he lost his fingers. Danforth got angry and started questioning who Clay really was. During their call, Clay suddenly appeared and attacked Garnett. He tied Garnett to the front of his car and drove it into the water, killing him. Danforth heard everything on the phone. Clay then took Garnett's phone and told Danforth he was coming for him. Verona and her partner, Matt, tried to find information about Clay in government databases but found nothing. Verona thought Clay might have had special training from a secret government group, something even the FBI didn't know about. Soon after, Verona learned that Garnett, a high-ranking member of UDG, was found drowned and tied to Clay's truck. Meanwhile, Danforth decided to meet with Wallace, a former CIA head who now handled his security because his mother, Jessica, the new president of the United States, wanted him to be safe. When Wallace heard about Danforth's trouble with someone called the Beekeeper, he took action. He called Janet, the current CIA director, to ask about Clay. Janet said Clay had retired from the Beekeepers. Wallace told Janet to kill Clay. Janet then contacted the Beekeepers and asked one of their operatives, Anna, to assassinate Clay. While Clay was at a gas station, Anna ambushed him, but Clay managed to escape and defeat her. He cut off her fingers and set her on fire, causing the gas station to explode. To avoid more trouble, the Beekeepers told the CIA they would stay neutral and not go after Clay anymore. Janet informed Wallace that both the CIA and the Beekeepers would stay out of the fight between Clay and Danforth. With this information, Wallace had to take action himself to get rid of Clay. He put together a team of Special Forces members and told them about the Beekeepers. He made Clay seem like a rogue agent who was a danger to innocent people, convincing the Special Forces that Clay needed to be stopped. The next day, Verona and Matt arrived at the burned gas station and found Anna's unrecognizable body. It seemed Anna was part of a secret government group, but Verona didn't know why she was after Clay. Meanwhile, Clay used Anna's severed finger to enter her home and access her computer. He tracked the signal from Garnett's phone to find Danforth's location at the 9 Points building. Armed with this information, Clay took weapons and explosives from Anna's place and left. At the same time, Wallace's Special Forces, tasked with eliminating Clay, had already reached the 9 Points building. Outside, the FBI SWAT team was ready, knowing Clay would attack the building. Surprisingly, Wallace and his team let the employees inside continue working as usual. Like UDG, the NSU company in the building was part of a criminal group involved in phishing scams. Soon, Clay arrived and caught the SWAT team off guard as they planned outside. He quickly attacked and overpowered the SWAT team. After dealing with them, Clay entered the building and blended in with the NSU employees. However, one of the Special Forces members recognized him and attacked. Wallace's Special Forces joined in, but Clay skillfully avoided their attacks, defeating them one by one until none were left. Afterward, Clay interrogated Rico, an NSU executive, demanding to know the company's owner. Rico was scared but eventually revealed that the owner was very powerful and seemed untouchable by the law. Clay said that nothing was beyond his reach and promised to take down this ultimate power if it threatened innocent lives. Rico, fearing for his life, reluctantly gave up his boss's identity. At that moment, Verona and her team arrived with weapons aimed at Clay, but Clay managed to escape. Meanwhile, Verona and her partner discovered that the owner of both NSU and UDG, which were involved in phishing scams, was Danforth, the son of the President of the United States. These companies were part of Danforth Enterprises, owned by the Danforth family, which managed software for various U.S. government agencies. Verona also realized that Clay might not only target Danforth, but could also be a threat to the President, Jessica, who was Danforth's mother. Upon learning this, Deputy Director Prigg assigned Verona and Matt to capture Clay, while the SWAT team increased security for the President and her family. The next day, Verona and her partner joined Secret Service agents to protect the U.S. President and her son, who were hosting a charity event at their beachfront mansion. Despite the tight security with Secret Service and FBI agents, Wallace was still worried about Danforth's safety. So, he hired a group of mercenaries led by Lazarus, who claimed he had taken down a beekeeper before, though he lost a leg doing it. Meanwhile, Clay sneaked into the Danforth estate through a drainage channel and hid under a truck. He knocked out a SWAT team member, planted bombs on the vehicles, and disguised himself to blend in with the charity event guests. Prigg met with the president and explained everything, including Danforth's use of software from Danforth Enterprises to create phishing scam companies. Furious upon learning that their campaign funds came from illegal activities, Jessica was angry. At the same time, Verona realized Clay was there and ordered the SWAT team to catch him. Surrounded and at gunpoint, Clay pretended to surrender, but then detonated the Secret Service trucks as a distraction. He quickly dealt with those who cornered him and rushed into the mansion to find Danforth. Inside, Jessica, now aware of her son's crimes, decided to expose Danforth's actions, hoping for mercy. Clay fought through the building, injuring Secret Service agents but showing no mercy to Wallace's mercenaries. Eventually, Clay reached the hallway to the president's office and fought Lazarus. After defeating him, Clay moved toward the president's office. Wallace tried to stop him, asking Clay not to kill Danforth. Ignoring Wallace, Clay broke his fingers and continued. In the office, Danforth, desperate as his mother prepared to reveal his crimes, grabbed a pistol and shot Prigg. In the chaos, Clay placed an explosive on the door and burst into the room, followed by Verona and other FBI agents. Danforth, panicking, took his mother, Jessica, hostage. Verona tried to convince Clay not to harm Jessica or her son. Danforth, nervous and desperate, considered hurting his mother to escape. In this tense moment, Clay asked Verona if she was seeking law enforcement or justice. Seeing Danforth's threat to his own mother, Clay made his decision. He shot and killed Danforth, then escaped through a window. Verona had a clear shot at Clay but let him go, choosing justice for her mother and other victims over strict law enforcement. The film ended with Clay fleeing the mansion, using scuba gear hidden on the beach to escape. So the moral of the story is, if you mess with beekeepers, you might just get stung. Oh, and maybe think twice before inviting a secret agent turned beekeeper to dinner.